in the summer of 1518, in the city of Strasbourg, a woman stepped into the street and began to dance. There was no music, no festival, and no reason for anyone to join her. At first, people watched with curiosity. Some laughed, some whispered, others thought she was drunk, possessed, or simply trying to draw attention. But the woman did not stop. Hour after hour, she moved through the narrow street as if her body no longer obeyed her. Her name was Frau Troffea, and by the time she collapsed from exhaustion, the people around her were no longer laughing. After she rested, she began again. The next day, she was still dancing. Soon, others joined her. One dancer became several became dozens, and before Strasbourg understood what was happening, the city was facing one of the strangest outbreaks ever recorded. A plague without fever. A sickness without wounds. An epidemic of movement. The city where people seemed unable to stop dancing. Strasbourg in 1518 was not the calm European city people know today. At the time, it belonged to the Holy Roman Empire, a crowded medieval world of stone walls, church bells, markets, workshops, and fear. Life was hard for ordinary people. Food shortages were common. Disease could enter a home without warning. Poverty pressed on families year after year, and religion shaped almost every explanation for suffering. If crops failed, people looked for divine anger. If sickness spread, they searched for sin. If a person lost control of their body, few would think first of psychology, trauma, or nervous illness. They thought of punishment, possession, a curse. In that world, one woman dancing in the street could become more than a strange incident. It could become a sign. And in a city already under pressure, a sign could spread faster than reason. Frau Troffea's dance began alone, but it did not stay that way. As the days passed, more people started moving in the same disturbing manner. Some danced until their feet bled. Others collapsed from exhaustion, only to rise again and continue. The streets of Strasbourg became a stage no one had built and no one understood. Imagine a narrow medieval road under the summer heat. Stone houses lean over the street. Neighbors watch from windows. Children hide behind their parents. In the center, a woman moves with no joy on her face. This was not a celebration. It was not performance. It was movement without freedom. Then another person joined. Then another. At first, the city could pretend this was only a strange episode. But when the number of dancers grew, pretending became impossible. The dance had spread, and no one knew why. Within a week, the situation had become serious. More than 30 people were said to have joined the dance within days. Over the following weeks, the numbers only grew, and some accounts describe as many as 400 people caught in the same compulsion. The exact figures remain debated, but the panic itself was real. People were not dancing for a few minutes and returning home. They were moving for hours. Some had swollen feet. Some were carried away barely conscious. Some seemed trapped inside a rhythm they could not escape. To modernize, it sounds almost impossible, but to the people of Strasbourg, it was happening in front of them. The city had seen hunger, illness, and death before. Those things were terrifying but familiar. This was different. A wound could be treated. A fever could be watched. A corpse could be buried. But what do you do when people who look healthy step into the street and move as if commanded by something no one else can hear? The authorities had to act. Their first response is one of the strangest parts of the story. According to historical accounts, local officials listened to physicians who believed the dancers were suffering from overheated blood. In their view, the illness had to burn itself out through movement. So instead of stopping the dancers, the city appears to have made space for them. Public areas may have been opened, musicians may have been hired. The hope was simple: let them dance until the sickness passes. But the decision may have made everything worse. Music gave shape to the chaos. Open space gave the dancers a place to gather. What had begun with one woman in a street became a public crisis watched by an entire city. Strasbourg had tried to cure the dancing plague by giving it a rhythm. Picture the square. Musicians play because officials believe it might help. Drums echo against stone walls. Exhausted dancers stumble in circles. Families beg loved ones to stop. Priests watch with fear. Doctors offer explanations they cannot prove. The city becomes something between a festival and a nightmare. But there is no joy in it. A person dancing by choice can stop when the music ends. These people could not, or at least they believed they could not. That belief mattered. The mind and body are not separate machines. Fear can change breathing. Grief can weaken the body. Stress can create pain. Pant can move through a crowd faster than fire. In Strasbourg, something invisible was passing from person to person. Not a germ. Not a demon. Something harder to name. A shared terror powerful enough to take control of the body. To understand why Strasbourg was vulnerable, we have to look at what came before the dancing began. The years leading up to 1518 had been difficult. Hunger, disease, and poverty weighed heavily on the population. Many people lived close to disaster even in ordinary times. When food was scarce, bodies weakened. When disease spread, families broke. When money failed, hope became fragile. And when people could not explain their suffering, they turned to the explanations their world offered. In that region, there was a belief connected to Saint Vitus, a saint associated with dancing and nervous disorders. Some believed Saint Vitus could punish sinners by forcing them to dance. To us, that may sound strange. But in 1518, belief was not decoration. It was part of reality. If people feared that a saint could curse them with dance, then seeing someone dance uncontrollably could become terrifying. And terror, in the right conditions, can become contagious. It is easy to lose the human scale inside these explanations. So return for a moment to a single dancer. Bare feet on hot stone, the skin split and bleeding, a throat too dry to call for help, eyes open, fixed on nothing at all. By some accounts, at the height of that summer, as many as 15 people a day were dying, of strokes, of heart failure, of pure exhaustion. The numbers are uncertain, and historians still argue over them. The bodies were not. Many modern explanations focus on mass psychogenic illness. The historian John Waller, who studied the Strasbourg case in detail, considers it the most convincing answer we have. The phrase sounds clinical, but the idea is direct. Under extreme stress, groups of people can experience real physical symptoms that spread through fear, expectation, and shared belief rather than through infection. The symptoms are not fake. The suffering is not an act. But the cause may come from the mind under pressure, shaped by the culture around it. Strasbourg had the ingredients for this kind of outbreak: hunger, religious fear, disease, exhaustion, and a population already living with anxiety. Then Frau Troffea began to dance. The city watched. The city feared. The city interpreted what it saw through the beliefs it already carried. Others followed, not because they were pretending, but because their world had given them a terrifying script. Their bodies began to perform it. There are other theories. Some have suggested poisoning from contaminated grain, especially ergot, a fungus that can grow on rye and cause hallucinations, spasms, and severe illness. At first, the idea seems possible. Medieval Europe depended heavily on grain, and bad harvests could lead to dangerous food. But the theory has problems. Ergot poisoning can cause convulsions and pain, yet it does not perfectly explain people dancing for days in a socially spreading pattern across a city. Others have pointed to religious mania. Some emphasize poverty and trauma. Others see the event as a combination of many pressures colliding at once. That may be closest to the truth. The dancing plague may not have had one single cause. It may have emerged from hunger, belief, fear, exhaustion, authority, music, and panic meeting in the same place at the same time. A perfect storm inside a city's mind. Eventually, the authorities changed their approach. Instead of encouraging the dancers, they tried to stop the movement. Music was removed. Public dancing spaces were closed. Some dancers may have been sent to religious sites connected to Saint Vitus, where rituals and prayers were performed. Slowly, the outbreak faded. The streets grew quieter. The crowds disappeared. The music stopped. But the question remained. What had happened to Strasbourg? The answer at the time belonged to saints, curses, and divine punishment. The modern answer belongs more to psychology, social contagion, and stress. Yet even with modern language, the dancing plague remains unsettling. It shows something people prefer not to admit. Human beings are not as separate from crowds as they think. Fear moves between us. Belief changes perception. Panic can become physical. And under enough pressure, the body can express what the mind can no longer contain. Think again about Frau Troffea. The story often treats her as the beginning of the disaster, but perhaps she was not the cause. Perhaps she was only the first visible crack in a wall that had been under pressure for years. A woman stepped into the street and danced. That is what people saw. Behind that moment were hunger, illness, religious fear, social tension, and a city full of people already close to breaking. Her body may have spoken a language the whole city understood, not through words, through movement. When others saw her, something in them recognized it, a fear they carried, a punishment they believed in, a loss of control they already dreaded. That is what makes the story powerful. The dancing plague was not strange only because people danced. It was strange because the dance revealed something hidden. A city can look normy from the outside. Markets open, church bells ring, families work, pray, and eat. But inside, pressure can build quietly. Until one day, it finds a body. The image of Strasbourg in 1518 is difficult to forget. A woman turning in the street. A crowd gathering. Doctors watching without answers. Musicians playing because officials believed rhythm might cure madness. Dancers collapsing from exhaustion. Families praying for the movement to stop. Above it all was the fear that this was not illness, but judgment. Today we may not believe in the same curses, but we are not immune to the same forces. Crowds still panic, rumors still spread, fear still changes bodies, people still become trapped inside ideas powerful enough to feel physical. That is why the dancing plague remains more than a medieval curiosity. It is a warning about pressure, belief, and what happens when a community suffers for too long without a clear way to understand its pain. The people of Strasbourg were not foolish. They were human. And under the right conditions, humans can become strangers to themselves. The dancing plague of 1518 did not leave behind a single clean answer. It left fragments, names, reports, medical explanations, religious fears. A woman remembered for a dance she may never have wanted to begin. A city remembered for a sickness no one could see. Some stories are frightening because of what they suggest about the supernatural. This one is frightening because of what it reveals about us. No monster had to enter Strasbourg. No army had to break through the walls. No visible plague had to darken the skin or fill the lungs. The city already carried the conditions for disaster inside itself. And when the moment came, the disaster did not look like war. It looked like dancing. Not joyful dancing, not free dancing, but desperate movement, repeated until the body collapsed and the person inside seemed trapped by their own rhythm. In the end, the dancing stopped. The echo did not. More than 500 years later, we still ask the same question. Why did they dance? The answer may be fear, faith, hunger, illness, trauma, or all of them together. Maybe Frau Troffea was not cursed. Maybe she was breaking under pressure that no one around her knew how to name. And maybe the city that watched her was closer to breaking than anyone wanted to admit. That is the darkest possibility. The dancing plague may not have been an invasion from outside. It may not have been a demon entering the streets. It may have been Strasbourg itself, turning suffering into motion, a silent scream made visible, a nightmare with human feet. In 1518, Strasbourg did not burn, and no enemy ever breached its walls. But for several terrifying weeks, something inside the city slipped out of control, and people danced as if stopping was no longer possible. The streets are quiet now. The musicians are gone. The dancers are dust. Frau Troffea remains more shadow than person. We do not know exactly what she felt. We do not know whether she was terrified, exhausted, numb, or trapped somewhere inside her own mind. But we know this. One summer day in 1518, she stepped into the street and began to dance, and the city followed. No one has ever fully explained why. The answer may not be found in one theory, but in the collision of many, a hungry city, a frightened population, a powerful belief, a body under pressure, and a crowd ready to turn one person's suffering into a shared nightmare. The dancing plague of 1518 reminds us that history is not only made of kings, wars, ships, and empires. Sometimes history begins with one person in the street, moving, unable to stop. This was Tri-Echoes. Some stories do not end. They echo.